The government and rebels in South Sudan have signed a ceasefire to end 5 weeks of fighting that's killed thousands of soldiers and civilians. The deal was reached at peace talks in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa and represents the first real progress since the conflict began. Al Jazeera's Jamal Elshayyal sent this update from JUba, the South Sudanese capital.
It's been a long-awaited ceasefire deal, but a huge break deal nonetheless. At least now those who have fled their homes because of the violence that has raged through South Sudan over the past several weeks have some hope that they may return soon. This ceasefire deal just signed in Addis Ababa essentially guarantees that there will be a cessation of fire, that there will be permission, or that both sides would allow for humanitarian aid to reach those affected. However, it will only be implemented 24 hours after the signing, after the time of that signing. Despite this breakthrough, despite the ceasefire, many view that this is just a patching of a wound that continues to bleed, because there are real differences between both sides here. There is Riek Machar, the former vice president, who many see is a person who believes he should be running this country, pitted against Salva Kiir, the current president, who enjoys widespread support as someone who is seen to have liberated South Sudan. There is also that tribal undertone between the Nuer tribe, who Riek Machar belongs to, and the other tribes, the Dinkas and other tribes across South Sudan. So many view that unless real accountability for the crimes committed over the past few weeks is reached, unless real reconciliation is reached between both sides, it is difficult to see how this ceasefire would last very long.
Now, recent satellite pictures documenting the extent of the damage caused by the conflict in South Sudan have emerged. Let's have a look at them, because the image on the left was taken a month earlier, and on the 10th of January, the few houses on the right was all that remained, as entire homes had been razed to the ground. The next picture too shows the destruction is clear, as an entire village had been burnt down in the town of Mayom, that's in Unity State. In Bor, the images also show a significant growth in the number of displaced people at the UN compound between late December and January. Well, let's talk to Eric Reeves. He's at the South Sudan researcher at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. He joins us live via Skype. Eric Reeves, those satellite photos show the extent of the devastation because of the violence. However, the ceasefire is the first real progress since the conflict began. How robust is the truce, and do you think it'll hold?
I don't think it's very robust at all. And I think the photographs you've just shown indicate the reason why. Either there was command and control that permitted this kind of massive civilian destruction, or there was not. Either way, we've got armed forces that are out of control, that are targeting civilians gratuitously, and it's going to be very, very difficult to ratchet back this kind of violence. It's also important to remember that the SPLA, when it was fighting the North, was unified, even though it was made up primarily of relatively discrete units, militias. Once the war had ended, a lot of those militias split apart, and there are further splits that could come with this division within the SPLA between those allied with the rebels. Riek Machar is not the only rebel, and the forces loyal to the government of South Sudan.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make about control over those rebel groups. I mean, one important question is whether or not Riek Machar has enough control over opposition rebel groups under his command.
I doubt it very highly. It's a difficult thing to communicate in South Sudan, and to communicate from the bush with essentially militia units or militia-sized units over broad territory. I can't believe he controls in any significant way more than a very small percentage of these forces. So we're going to have to see some leadership at the lower levels, lower ranks, if the ceasefire is going to hold. The next 24 hours are crucial, but they will not be definitive. If there's only a slight ratcheting down of violence, I don't think the truce will hold. We really need to see something substantial happen in the next day or so.
Meanwhile, many observers say this ceasefire is just the first step on a long road to resolving the conflict, but there still remains, of course, the broader political issues that started the conflict in the first place.
That's certainly right. And it's one reason for seeing a distinction between those detainees who remain incarcerated and Riek Machar. Riek represents a force, a side in the conflict, willing to engage in the armed overthrow of a government. Others of those incarcerated, Pagana Mum, Dangalore, for example, are not. They are determined to reform the government of South Sudan, but they mean to do so by democratic means. And this is a very important split that hasn't been sufficiently well articulated in news reporting that would have it be Nuer against Dinka, Salva Kiir against Riek Machar. It's much more complicated than that. And the problems of governance that need to be overcome are in some ways similar to those that plagued the SPLA as an armed unit. The government of South Sudan has the organization, in many ways, of a guerrilla movement, but it's now not a guerrilla movement, it's the head of an independent country.
Eric Reeves, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.